The Galactic Council's emergency session buzzed with tension as representatives from 12 different species gathered in the Grand Chamber aboard the orbital station Nexus Prime. Ambassador Zephyrian of the Valkyrie Empire stood at the central podium, his four arms gesturing dramatically as holographic displays showed tactical readouts from across the galaxy. Honored delegates, Zephyrian's translator rendered his clicks and chirps in his standard galactic. We face an unprecedented crisis. The Devourers have broken through our outer defense perimeter. 3 colony worlds have already fallen silent. A collective shudder rippled through the assembly. The Devourers were every spacefaring civilization's nightmare. A hive-minded species that consumed entire worlds, stripping them of all organic matter before moving on like cosmic locusts. They had appeared without warning 6 months ago, emerging from the dark space between galaxies with technology that defied understanding. Our combined fleets, continued the Valkyrie ambassador, have suffered catastrophic losses. The Throne Guard's finest warriors, the Mechanicus battlespheres, even the psionic might of the ethereal collective. Nothing has slowed their advance. At current projections, they will reach the core worlds within 2 standard cycles. Ambassador Kethra of the Arachnid Confederacy rose on her spider-like legs, mandibles clicking nervously. What a newer species. The humans have been making considerable noise about their military capabilities since joining the Council 5 years ago. A wave of dismissive chittering and growling filled the chamber. Ambassador Gorvek of the Ursine Commonwealth snorted, his massive, bear-like frame shaking with what passed for laughter among his people. The humans? Those soft primates who barely managed to achieve faster-than-light travel? Their entire military is a joke compared to a single Valkyrie battle cruiser. Indeed, added High Magistrate Thyalon of the crystalline hegemony, his silicon-based form gleaming under the chamber's lights. Their weapons technology is primitive. Their ships are crude metal constructs, and their soldiers lack any significant genetic or technological enhancements. They would serve only as fodder against the Devourers. Zephyrian's expression grew grave. Unfortunately, our analysis confirms these assessments. Humanity lacks the technological sophistication necessary for this conflict. Their inclusion would only divert resources we cannot afford to lose. What none of the assembled delegates knew was that their conversation was being monitored. In a small, cramped observation booth overlooking the main chamber, Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force sat in stunned silence, her augmented reality display translating every word in real time. Chun was humanity's military attaché to the Galactic Council, a position that had been largely ceremonial until today. At 45, she was a career soldier who had seen action in the resource wars on Earth and, later, in the colonial conflicts around Proxima Centauri. Her weathered face bore the marks of someone who had spent decades in the field, and her gray eyes held the steady gaze of a veteran who had faced death more times than she could count. "Primitive," she muttered, her jaw clenching as she watched the alien delegates dismiss her species without a second thought. Crude metal constructs. Her hands moved to her uniform's communication device, activating an encrypted channel back to Earth. The signal would take several minutes to reach home due to the distance, but she knew every second counted. Priority Alpha transmission to UEDF High Command. She spoke quietly into the device. This is Captain Chun reporting from Nexus Prime. The Galactic Council has officially declined human military assistance against the Devourer threat. They consider our forces inadequate for the conflict. She paused, watching as the alien delegates began debating evacuation protocols and last-ditch defensive strategies. Their panic was palpable, despite their earlier confidence. I'm transmitting all available tactical data on the Devourer forces and their capabilities. Recommend immediate mobilization of special operations assets. If the Council won't ask for our help, we may need to provide it anyway. The transmission ended, and Chun settled back to continue monitoring the proceedings. She had served alongside enough alien forces during joint training exercises to know that their military doctrines, while advanced in some ways, were often rigid and predictable. The Valkyrie relied on overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority. The Ursine Commonwealth favored brute force tactics. The crystalline hegemony used swarm tactics with expendable drone units. But none of them had faced an enemy like the Devourers, and none of them understood what humans called asymmetric warfare. 3 days later, Chen received her response from Earth. The message was brief and came directly from General Marcus Hayes, the gruff Texan who commanded all UEDF special operations. Chen, your report has been noted. Operation Razor's Edge is hereby authorized. Ghost Battalion is en route to your position. ETA, 72 hours. Keep monitoring the situation and await further orders. And Captain, good work. Ghost Battalion. Chun felt a chill of anticipation. She had heard whispers about the unit during her time at UEDF headquarters, but had never seen them in action. They were recruited exclusively from veterans of Earth's most elite military units, former Navy SEALs, SAS operatives, Spetsnaz commandos, and others who had proven themselves in the most dangerous conflicts humanity had ever faced. But these weren't ordinary special forces anymore. Each member of Ghost Battalion had undergone extensive modifications and training that pushed the boundaries of human capability. Genetic therapies enhanced their reflexes and healing abilities. Neural implants allowed them to interface directly with advanced combat systems. Synthetic muscle grafts increased their strength and endurance beyond normal human limits. Most importantly, they had been trained in combat doctrines that no alien species had ever encountered. While the galaxy's military forces fought according to ancient traditions of honor and glory, humans had learned through centuries of brutal warfare that survival mattered more than pride. The next morning, Chen watched the Galactic Council's daily briefing with growing concern. The Devourer advance had accelerated. 2 more worlds had gone dark, including a major Valkyrie military staging area. Refugee ships clogged the hyperspace lanes as entire systems evacuated ahead of the approaching swarm. The situation is deteriorating rapidly, reported Admiral Vorthak of the Aquarian Fleet. His gill slits fluttered with agitation as he gestured at the tactical display. Our forces engaged the Devourer Vanguard at Kepler 442. Of 37 capital ships, only 4 survived to retreat. The enemy appears to learn and adapt to our tactics with each engagement. Ambassador Zephyrian's expression was grim. Intelligence suggests the Devourers are not merely consuming resources. They appear to be analyzing the technology and biological matter they encounter, incorporating successful elements into their own forces. Each battle makes them stronger. Chen made careful notes as she watched the briefing. The Devourer's adaptive capabilities explained why conventional tactics had failed so dramatically. The galaxy's military leaders were fighting yesterday's war against an enemy that evolved with each encounter. Her thoughts were interrupted by a subtle vibration from her communication device. A coded message had arrived via quantum entanglement relay, instantaneous communication across any distance. Only the most sensitive military operations used quantum channels. Package delivered. Unwrapping in progress. Expect contact within 6 hours. Reaper, Chun smiled grimly. Reaper was the call sign for Colonel James Morrison, Ghost Battalion's commanding officer. She had read his file during the flight to Nexus Prime. Morrison was a legend in special operations circles, a former Delta Force operator who had led some of the most classified missions in human history. If anyone could pull off what High Command had in mind, it was him. 6 hours later, Chen's quarters chimed with an incoming call. She activated her secure communicator to find herself facing a lean, scarred man in his early 40s. Morrison's dark eyes held the same 1,000-yard stare she had seen in so many veteran soldiers. But there was something else there, a cold intelligence that spoke of a man who had turned killing into an art form. Captain Chen. Morrison's voice was quiet and controlled. I trust you've been monitoring the situation here. Yes, sir. The Council's forces are being systematically destroyed. Their current strategy appears to be focused on delaying actions while they evacuate core populations to fallback positions. Classic defensive mindset, Morrison nodded. They're thinking like prey instead of predators. What's their assessment of our capabilities? Chen couldn't help but smile. They consider us primitive and unsuited for modern warfare. One delegate specifically mentioned our crude metal constructs and primitive weapons technology. Perfect. Morrison's expression was predatory. Nothing like being underestimated. Have you identified potential insertion points for reconnaissance operations? Yes, sir. There are 3 systems along the Devourer advance route where our ships could deploy without detection by Council forces. The enemy appears to be following predictable vectors based on stellar density and resource concentrations. Excellent. We'll need detailed intelligence on their ship designs, weapon systems, and tactical patterns before we can plan effective countermeasures. My people are already studying the Council's engagement records, but we need first-hand observation. Chen nodded. What about official authorization? The Council has made it clear that human involvement is not welcome. Morrison's smile was cold. Captain, sometimes the best help is the kind nobody asks for. We'll operate under humanitarian protocols, protecting human colonies and shipping in the affected regions. If our operations happen to interfere with Devourer activities, well, that's just an unfortunate coincidence. The connection ended, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts. She had spent her entire career serving within established chains of command and international law. What Morrison was proposing was essentially rogue military action on a galactic scale. But as she watched the latest tactical updates showing the Devourer forces advancing inexorably toward inhabited systems, she realized that conventional approaches had already failed. The galaxy's established powers were losing badly, and their pride was preventing them from seeking help from the one species that might have solutions they hadn't considered. 3 days later, Chen received word that several Council delegations had requested emergency sessions to discuss evacuation protocols for their core systems. The mood in the Nexus Prime corridors had shifted from confident planning to barely controlled panic. The Devourers have adapted faster than our worst projections, she overheard Admiral Vorthak telling a group of junior officers. They're now incorporating captured Council technology into their own ships. Our weapons are becoming increasingly ineffective. That evening, Chen watched the Council's emergency session from her observation booth. The debate had devolved into finger-pointing and desperate proposals for last-ditch defensive strategies. Several delegates openly discussed the possibility of abandoning large sectors of space to the Devourers while consolidating defenses around their most important worlds. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Kethra, her voice trembling slightly, we should reconsider our earlier decision regarding human participation. Their unconventional thinking might provide fresh perspectives on our tactical challenges. Gorvek's response was immediate and contemptuous. The humans lack the basic technological infrastructure to meaningfully contribute to this conflict. Their ships cannot even match the speed of our courier vessels, and their weapons would be as effective as thrown rocks against Devourer armor. The Ursine delegate speaks truth, agreed High Magistrate Thylon. Human involvement would require us to divert experienced officers to training and coordination roles we cannot spare. The potential benefits do not justify the resource allocation. Chun gritted her teeth as she watched the debate continue. These beings, for all their technological sophistication, were trapped by their own assumptions about proper warfare. They couldn't conceive of strategies that didn't rely on technological superiority or overwhelming force. Her communication device vibrated with another quantum message. Phase 1 complete. Intelligence gathered. Phase 2 initiating tomorrow. Recommend minimal Council contact for next 48 hours. Reaper, Chun felt her pulse quicken. Whatever Morrison and his team had discovered during their reconnaissance mission, it was significant enough to accelerate their timeline. She settled in to monitor Council communications for any signs that Ghost Battalion's activities had been detected. The next morning brought chaos. Emergency alarms echoed throughout Nexus Prime as Council military commanders received reports from the front lines. Chun hurried to the main command center, where tactical displays showed something unprecedented happening in the Kepler 442 system. Impossible, breathed Admiral Vorthak as he stared at the incoming data. 3 Devourer heavy cruisers have been completely destroyed. No Council forces were in the area at the time of the engagement. Ambassador Zephyrian's 4 arms gestured frantically as he processed the tactical data. The attack patterns don't match any known Council weapon systems. These ships appear to have been destroyed from within. Massive internal explosions that suggest sabotage rather than external attack. Perhaps they experienced some kind of system failure, suggested one of the junior officers hopefully. Negative, replied the Valkyrie admiral. The explosions were precisely timed and targeted critical systems. This was definitely hostile action. But who could have penetrated Devourer shields without being detected? Chun maintained her expression of polite interest while internally celebrating. Ghost Battalion's first operation had been a spectacular success, and more importantly, they had done it without revealing their presence. The Council delegates were now facing the uncomfortable reality that someone else was fighting the Devourers and winning. Over the next 3 days, similar reports filtered in from across the combat zone. Devourer ships suffering mysterious system failures. Supply convoys vanishing without trace. Advanced scouting forces retreating from seemingly empty star systems after sustaining inexplicable casualties. The enemy advance has slowed significantly, reported Admiral Vorthak during the daily briefing. They appear to be consolidating their forces and reassessing their tactical approach. This is the first time we've observed defensive behavior from the Devourers. Ambassador Zephyrian's translator worked overtime as he rapid-fired excited comments to his staff. Intelligence suggests the Devourers are implementing new security protocols and formation changes. They're clearly responding to an unknown threat. Chun watched the Council delegates struggle to understand what was happening. Their entire worldview was based on the assumption that superior technology guaranteed military victory. The idea that inferior forces might achieve strategic effects through unconventional methods was alien to their thinking. Her communication device provided the answer that evening. Morrison's latest report was longer than usual, indicating significant developments in Ghost Battalion's operations. Captain, Phase 2 has exceeded all expectations. Devourer ship designs contain critical vulnerabilities that Council forces never identified. Their adaptive capabilities work against them in close-quarters combat. They're optimized for ship-to-ship engagement, but lack adequate internal security measures. My teams have successfully infiltrated and destroyed 17 enemy vessels using insertion techniques impossible for Council forces to replicate. More importantly, we've recovered substantial intelligence on Devourer command and control systems. Recommend proceeding to Phase 3 immediately. Target identification complete for primary objective. Will require Council distraction for maximum effectiveness. Suggest you find a way to encourage conventional attack on Devourer staging area in the Proxima Centauri system within next 72 hours. Chun stared at the message, understanding its implications. Morrison wasn't just planning to harass the Devourer forces. He intended to strike at their command structure directly. But success would require the Council's unwitting cooperation to provide cover for his operation. She began planning how to manipulate the next day's tactical briefing to achieve the desired result. After watching these aliens dismiss humanity for so long, it would be satisfying to use their own prejudices against them. The irony wasn't lost on her. While the galaxy's most advanced civilizations struggled against the Devourer threat using conventional approaches, a small force of modified humans was systematically dismantling the enemy through methods their own doctrine manuals would probably classify as primitive and crude. But, as every human soldier learned eventually, victory belonged to those who adapted fastest to changing circumstances. And, after centuries of warfare against their own species, humans have become very good at adaptation. The real test would come in the next phase of Morrison's operation. If Ghost Battalion could succeed in what they were planning, it wouldn't just save the galaxy from a Devourer threat. It would force every species in the Council to completely reassess their understanding of human capabilities. Chun smiled as she began drafting her next report to Earth. Soon, the galaxy would learn that dismissing humanity had been a very expensive mistake. Captain Chin's manipulation of the Council's tactical briefing proved easier than expected. During the morning session, she simply leaked selected intelligence reports about increased Devourer activity in the Proxima Centauri system through unofficial channels. By afternoon, 3 different Council delegations had independently proposed a major offensive operation to disrupt what they believed was a critical enemy staging area. The tactical situation presents an opportunity we cannot ignore, Admiral Vorthak declared as he outlined the proposed assault. Intelligence indicates substantial Devourer forces concentrated in the Proxima Centauri system. A coordinated strike could significantly disrupt their operational capacity. Ambassador Zephyrian's 4 arms moved in patterns that Chun had learned indicated enthusiasm among the Valkyrie. My Empire pledges 12 battle cruisers and supporting elements for this operation. The time has come to take aggressive action rather than merely reacting to enemy initiatives. Chun watched with satisfaction as the Council delegates committed to exactly the operation Morrison needed for cover. Their eagerness to finally strike back at the Devourers blinded them to the suspicious nature of the intelligence that had prompted their decision. That evening, she transmitted the Council's operational timeline to Ghost Battalion through quantum channels. Morrison's response was immediate and brief. Outstanding work. Commencing Phase 3 in 18 hours. Recommend you maintain normal observation schedule during operational window. The next day dawned with reports of massive Council fleet movements toward the Proxima Centauri system. Chun monitored the preparations from her observation post, noting the scale of forces being committed. Nearly 200 capital ships from 6 different species, supported by thousands of smaller vessels and fighter craft. It was the largest military operation mounted since the Devourer crisis began. What the Council delegates didn't know was that their impressive armada was serving as the perfect distraction for a much smaller, but infinitely more dangerous force. Colonel Morrison crouched in the maintenance shaft of the Devourer command vessel, his enhanced vision piercing the alien darkness as he studied the ship's internal layout through his neural interface. The vessel was massive, nearly 10 kilometers in length, and its organic architecture pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of living technology beyond current human understanding. Behind him, the 12 members of Ghost Battalion's Alpha team moved with predatory silence. Each soldier was equipped with adaptive camouflage systems that rendered them invisible to most sensor types, and their weapons had been specifically modified to function within the unique electromagnetic environment of Devourer ships. Reaper to all teams, Morrison whispered into his throat microphone. Confirming position reports. Bravo team in position at primary power nexus, came the reply from Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a former Korean Special Forces operator whose expertise in demolitions had earned her the call sign Demolition Angel. Charlie team secured at navigation control, reported Master Sergeant Viktor Petrov, whose Spetsnaz background made him ideal for infiltration operations in hostile territory. Delta team ready at communications hub, added Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, whose experience in electronic warfare with the Brazilian Special Forces had proven invaluable during their approach. Morrison smiled grimly. 48 hours of careful reconnaissance had revealed that Devourer command vessels, despite their advanced technology, followed predictable architectural patterns. Their confidence in their superiority had made them careless about internal security, assuming no enemy could penetrate their shields and hull defenses. They hadn't considered the possibility that their enemies might already be inside. Execute in sequence, Morrison ordered. Delta initiates in 60 seconds, followed by Charlie at 90 seconds, Bravo at 120. Alpha will secure the command center once internal communications are disrupted. The plan was elegantly simple. By taking control of the ship's communication systems first, they would prevent the Devourers from coordinating with their fleet. Navigation control would ensure the vessel couldn't escape or ram nearby ships. The power nexus would provide leverage for final negotiations. Morrison had studied every engagement record from Council forces, and one pattern was clear. The Devourer's strength came from their ability to adapt and coordinate as a collective intelligence, isolate individual ships from the network, and they became significantly more vulnerable to conventional tactics. Delta Team initiating, Santos reported. Morrison watched through shared tactical feeds as her team moved through the ship's nerve center, placing specialized devices that would allow them to monitor and control Devourer communications. The aliens' technology was organic and sophisticated, but it operated on principles that human electronic warfare specialists could understand and exploit. The Devourers themselves were another matter entirely. Morrison had observed them during the infiltration, and they were unlike anything in humanity's xenobiology databases. Roughly humanoid, but covered in chitinous armor, they moved with insectoid precision and showed no signs of individual personality or initiative. Every action appeared to be coordinated by some form of collective consciousness that made traditional psychological warfare impossible. But collective consciousness also meant collective vulnerability. Cut the network connections, and the individual Devourers became confused and disoriented. Communications secured, Santos reported. I'm seeing massive data flows routing through this hub. These things are definitely operating as a hive mind, implementing network isolation protocols now. Throughout the ship, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Devourers that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly began stumbling and clustering together, their movements becoming erratic and uncertain. Charlie Team moving on navigation, Petrov announced. His team's mission was more straightforward. Physically disable the ship's ability to maneuver by destroying key control nodes that couldn't be repaired quickly. Morrison led Alpha Team toward the command center, following corridors that seemed to pulse with organic life. The ship's architecture was beautiful in an alien way, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was moving through the digestive system of some vast creature rather than a constructed vessel. They encountered their first active resistance as they approached the command center. A group of 12 Devourers had formed a defensive position at a junction, their movements now showing some coordination as they adapted to the communication disruption. Contact front, Morrison whispered, signaling his team to take cover. The Devourers carried energy weapons that fired some form of concentrated plasma, powerful enough to punch through conventional armor, but limited by rate of fire and energy consumption. Ghost Battalion had trained for exactly this scenario. While the aliens relied on superior firepower, human special forces had perfected the art of fighting smarter rather than harder. Morrison gestured to Corporal Jake Thompson, a former Navy SEAL whose marksmanship skills had earned him the call sign Deadeye. Thompson nodded and activated his weapon's smart targeting system, which interfaced directly with his neural implants to provide superhuman accuracy. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. Human weapons were indeed primitive by galactic standards, kinetic projectiles fired by chemical propellants, but they were also nearly silent, produced no energy signature that Devourer sensors could detect, and could be fired with precision that the aliens' collective coordination couldn't match. Area secured, Thompson reported as the last Devourer collapsed. Proceeding to Command Center. The Command Center itself was a marvel of alien engineering, a spherical chamber where the ship's consciousness seemed to be concentrated. Organic interfaces pulsed with data streams, and at the center of it all stood what Morrison assumed was the ship's primary controller, a Devourer larger than the others, with modifications that suggested enhanced neural connectivity. Bravo Team, status report. Morrison requested his Alpha Team secure the command center. Power Nexus under our control, Lieutenant Kim replied. I've placed charges at critical junctions. We can either disable their power systems or trigger a cascade failure that will destroy the ship. Your choice, sir. Morrison studied the alien commander through his tactical visor. The creature seemed to be aware of their presence despite the communication disruption, its compound eyes tracking their movements with obvious intelligence. Negative on ship destruction, Morrison decided. We need this vessel intact for intelligence purposes. Disable weapons and defensive systems only. The next phase of the operation required delicate timing. Morrison activated his universal translator, a device that had proven essential for operations in alien environments, and addressed the Devourer commander directly. "I am Colonel James Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force," he announced. "Your vessel is now under human control. Your weapons are offline, your communications are severed, and your power systems are compromised. I have a proposition for you." The alien's response came as a series of clicking sounds that the translator struggled to render into English. Unknown species, inefficient, resistance futile, collective will adapt. "Your collective has been adapting to the wrong enemy," Morrison replied calmly. "You've been fighting the Council species, who rely on technological superiority and conventional tactics. But humans fight differently. We don't need superior technology to win. We need superior strategy." He gestured to his team, who maintained their positions with professional discipline despite being outnumbered by the ship's crew. "Right now, my people control every critical system on your command vessel. We could destroy it entirely if we chose, but instead we're offering you something the Council never would, a chance to negotiate." The Devourer commander's clicking became more agitated. Negotiation, unknown concept, collective requires consumption, adaptation through consumption. Morrison had expected this response. The briefing materials indicated that Devourers viewed all other species as resources to be consumed rather than potential allies or enemies to be respected. But he had also noticed something in the engagement records that suggested a possible alternative approach. "Your collective has been consuming technology and biological matter to adapt and grow stronger," Morrison continued. "But you've never encountered a species that grows stronger through conflict rather than through consumption. Every battle you fight teaches us more about your capabilities. Every ship you destroy shows us new weaknesses to exploit." He paused, allowing the universal translator to process his words. "The question is whether your collective is intelligent enough to recognize that humanity represents a different kind of threat than anything you've encountered before." The alien's response was immediate and violent. Several Devourers throughout the command center suddenly surged toward Alpha Team's positions, apparently receiving some form of command despite the communication disruption. Ghost Battalion's response was swift and devastating. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the best of the best, enhanced beyond normal human limits, and trained in combat techniques that had been refined through centuries of warfare. The Devourer's attack was brave, but futile. Hostile action terminated, Corporal Thompson reported as the last attacker fell. Command center secured. Morrison approached the alien commander, who now stood alone among the organic interfaces. "Your collective made a tactical error," he observed. "You assume that because we appear physically inferior, we must be strategically inferior as well. The Council delegates made the same mistake." The Devourer's clicking became almost frantic. "Impossible inferior species cannot. Adaptation requires. Adaptation requires intelligence, not just consumption," Morrison interrupted. "And intelligence means recognizing when you're facing an enemy you can't simply overwhelm with superior numbers or technology." He activated his communication system, sending a coded signal to the other teams. "All teams, prepare for extraction." Mission objectives achieved. The larger operation was proceeding exactly as planned. While the Council's massive fleet engaged Devourer forces in the outer system, Ghost Battalion had successfully infiltrated and neutralized the enemy's command vessel. But more importantly, they had demonstrated that human tactics could achieve strategic objectives that conventional military thinking couldn't accomplish. "Reaper to all teams," Morrison announced. "Commence extraction protocole." "We have what we came for." As Alpha Team prepared to leave the command center, Morrison turned back to the alien commander. "Your collective will want to analyze this engagement carefully," he said, "because humanity is just getting started." The extraction went smoothly, with each team withdrawing through the same maintenance shafts they had used to infiltrate the vessel. By the time the Devourers restored their communication systems and regained coordination, Ghost Battalion was already aboard their stealth transport and accelerating toward the system's outer edge. Behind them, the disabled command vessel drifted helplessly as its crew struggled to restore functionality to critical systems. The damage wasn't permanent. Lieutenant Kim's charges had been precisely placed to disable rather than destroy, but it would take hours to repair the damage. Hours that would give the Council fleet time to achieve a significant tactical victory, while the Devourer forces struggled to coordinate without their command vessel. Phase 3 complete. Morrison reported to Captain Chun through quantum channels. Primary objective achieved. Enemy command and control capabilities significantly degraded. Recommend monitoring Council engagement reports for confirmation of tactical success. Chun received the message just as alarms began sounding throughout Nexus Prime. The Council's attack on the Proxima Centauri system had achieved unprecedented success, with Devourer forces retreating in apparent disarray after suffering massive casualties. "Impossible," Admiral Vorthak was saying as Chun arrived at the command center. "Devourer forces have never retreated before. Their coordination appears to have completely collapsed during the engagement." Ambassador Zephyrian's forearms moved in patterns of confused excitement. "Our forces report that enemy ships stopped adapting to our tactics mid-battle. Several vessels appear to be operating independently rather than as part of their usual collective network." Chun maintained her expression of professional interest while internally celebrating. Morrison's operation had been even more successful than they had dared hope. By neutralizing the Devourer command vessel, Ghost Battalion had created exactly the tactical opportunity the Council forces needed to achieve their first major victory. "Perhaps," suggested High Magistrate Thylon, his crystalline form reflecting the tactical displays, "the enemy's adaptive capabilities have limitations we had not previously identified. This engagement suggests vulnerabilities in their command and control systems." Chin almost smiled at the irony. The galaxy's most sophisticated military minds were struggling to understand tactical results that had been achieved by what they considered a primitive species using crude weapons and outdated strategies. "Recommend immediate follow-up operations to exploit this advantage," Admiral Vorthak declared. "If we can replicate these results, we may be able to turn the tide of this conflict." Over the next several days, Chin watched as the Council's newfound confidence led to increasingly aggressive operations against Devourer forces. The aliens' analysis was correct. Something had fundamentally changed in the enemy's capabilities. What they didn't understand was that the change had been artificially induced by forces they refused to acknowledge. Morrison's final report arrived 3 days later, transmitted through normal channels rather than quantum encryption. "Captain Chun, Ghost Battalion has returned to normal rotation schedule. Mission classified as complete success. Enemy capabilities have been assessed and countermeasures developed. Recommend maintaining current operational security protocols until further notice." Chun smiled as she filed the report in her official records. The galaxy's military establishments would spend months analyzing the sudden change in Devourer tactics, never suspecting that the answer lay with the species they had dismissed as primitive and unsuited for modern warfare. But the real test was yet to come. Morrison's operation had proven that human tactics could achieve dramatic results against the Devourers, but it had also demonstrated the extent of the threat they faced. The enemy's adaptive capabilities and collective intelligence made them unlike anything humanity had encountered before. The question now was whether Ghost Battalion's success could be replicated on a larger scale, and whether the Council would swallow their pride long enough to ask for the help they desperately needed. Shin had a feeling that pride would be the last thing standing between the galaxy and salvation, and, as every human soldier knew, pride was a luxury that victorious armies couldn't afford. The Council's confidence proved short-lived. Within a week of their victory at Proxima Centauri, new reports began filtering in from across the conflict zone. The Devourers had adapted to their tactical setback with frightening speed, implementing new communication protocols and command structures that made their previous collective coordination seem primitive by comparison. The enemy appears to have completely restructured their operational doctrine, Admiral Vorthak reported during the emergency session. His gill slits fluttered with obvious distress as he gestured at the tactical displays. Individual vessels now operate with significantly greater autonomy while maintaining collective coordination through redundant command networks. Captain Shin watched from her observation booth as the Council delegates struggled to comprehend what had happened. Their victory had been real, but it had also provided the Devourers with valuable intelligence about Council tactics and capabilities. The enemy's adaptation had been so thorough that they were now more dangerous than before the engagement. Our analysis suggests they've implemented some form of distributed command system, Ambassador Zephyrian added, his translator struggling to keep pace with his rapid speech. Eliminating individual command vessels no longer disrupts their coordination. Each ship appears capable of functioning as a command node for surrounding forces. Chun felt a chill of apprehension. Morrison's tactics had worked brilliantly against the Devourer's original command structure, but the enemy had learned from that defeat and evolved beyond their previous limitations. Ghost Battalion would need to develop entirely new approaches if they hoped to remain effective. Her thoughts were interrupted by an urgent transmission from Earth. General Hayes' weathered face appeared on her secure communicator, his expression grim with the weight of bad news. Chun, we've been monitoring the situation through intelligence channels. The Devourer's adaptation has exceeded our worst-case projections. Morrison's initial success appears to have accelerated their evolutionary timeline rather than disrupting it. What are your orders, sir? Chun asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Operation Razor's Edge is being expanded to full-scale intervention. We can't allow the galaxy to fall while we maintain plausible deniability. Phantom Regiment is being deployed along with additional support elements. Chen's breath caught. Phantom Regiment was UEDF's most classified military unit, recruited from Ghost Battalion's most successful veterans and equipped with technology that pushed the boundaries of what current science considered possible. If Hayes was deploying them, the situation had moved far beyond conventional special operations. What about the Council's position on human involvement? She asked. Hayes' expression darkened. The Council's position is about to become irrelevant. Intelligence indicates the Devourers are preparing a final offensive that will target the core systems directly. If they succeed, every major civilization in the galaxy will cease to exist within 6 months. The transmission ended, leaving Chun staring at a blank screen while processing the implications. Humanity was about to reveal the full extent of their military capabilities to a galaxy that had dismissed them as primitives. The consequences would reshape interspecies relations forever. 2 days later, Chun watched the Council's daily briefing with growing tension as reports confirmed General Hayes' intelligence assessment. The Devourers had indeed massed their entire fleet for a coordinated assault on the galaxy's most important systems. Preliminary estimates suggested they commanded over 10,000 capital ships and millions of smaller vessels. The scale of the enemy force exceeds our combined defensive capabilities, Admiral Vorthak admitted, his voice hollow with defeat. Even with full mobilization of all Council military assets, we cannot hope to match their numbers or technological advantages. Ambassador Zephyrian's 4 arms moved in patterns that Chun had learned indicated despair among the Valkyrie. Our evacuation protocols cannot accommodate the populations of 17 core systems. Billions of lives will be lost if we cannot find some means of slowing their advance. Chun watched the alien delegates debate desperate measures, biological weapons, planetary destruction, even consideration of surrender negotiations. None of them mentioned the possibility of asking humanity for assistance. Their pride remained intact even as their civilizations faced extinction. Her communication device vibrated with an incoming quantum transmission. The message was brief, but carried implications that made her pulse race. Package delivery commencing. Recommend emergency relocation to secure facility. Phantom. Phantom was the call sign for Major General Elizabeth Stone, Phantom Regiment's commanding officer. Stone was a legend even among special operations veterans, a former CIA operative who had transitioned to military service during the Resource Wars and had since become the deadliest human being alive. If Stone was personally overseeing deployment, the operation would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Chun began implementing the emergency protocols Hayes had transmitted with Stone's deployment orders. Her official cover story would be a routine inspection of human colonial facilities in the outer systems. In reality, she would be coordinating with Phantom Regiment from a mobile command center that existed in none of the Council's official databases. 12 hours later, Chun found herself aboard the UEDF stealth cruiser Shadowhawk, a vessel that represented the cutting edge of human military technology. Unlike the crude metal constructs the Council delegates had dismissed, the Shadowhawk incorporated advanced materials and design principles that made it invisible to virtually all known detection methods. "Welcome aboard, Captain." Major General Stone greeted her in the ship's briefing room. Stone was a compact woman in her early 50s with steel-gray hair and the predatory grace of someone who had spent decades in the most dangerous environments humanity could produce. "Thank you for the extraction, General. I assume you've been monitoring the tactical situation?" "Continuously." Stone gestured to the holographic displays surrounding them. "The Devourer's adaptation exceeded our models, but it also revealed critical information about their technological base and strategic thinking. We now understand what we're truly fighting." Chin studied the displays, which showed Devourer force dispositions with a level of detail that shouldn't have been possible given the distances involved. "How are you gathering this intelligence?" Stone smiled, and Chin felt a chill at the predatory expression. "Captain, everything the Council knows about human capabilities comes from what we've chosen to reveal. Our actual technological development has followed paths that would be incomprehensible to species that rely solely on scientific advancement." She activated additional displays that showed human colonies and installations Chun had never seen in any official database. While the galaxy focused on faster-than-light travel and energy weapons, humanity continued developing in directions our history had already proven effective. Stealth technology, electronic warfare, psychological operations, and, most importantly, the integration of human intuition with artificial intelligence. The implications were staggering. Chen realized she was looking at evidence of a parallel human civilization that had been developing in secret while maintaining the appearance of technological inferiority. The resource wars weren't just about controlling mineral deposits, Stone continued. They were testing grounds for military technologies and tactical doctrines that we knew would eventually be needed against non-human threats. Every conflict on Earth and in the colonial systems contributed to our understanding of warfare against enemies with superior numbers and technology. Chun absorbed this revelation while studying the tactical data Stone was sharing. Human forces were already positioned throughout the galaxy in numbers that dwarfed official colony reports. Whatever Operation Phantom Regiment was planning had been in preparation for years. "What's the mission objective?" Chen asked. "Complete elimination of the Devourer threat through tactical methods that will demonstrate human military supremacy to every species in the galaxy," Stone replied without hesitation. The Council's dismissive attitude ends today. The briefing that followed revealed the true scope of human military preparation. Phantom Regiment consisted of 300 operators, each one representing the pinnacle of human enhancement and training. But they were supported by an infrastructure that included advanced AI systems, stealth technologies, and weapons platforms that existed decades ahead of anything the Council had developed. "The Devourer's collective intelligence makes them formidable," Stone explained, but it also creates exploitable vulnerabilities. Their adaptation capabilities are powerful, but follow predictable patterns based on observed threats. They can't adapt to threats they don't understand. She activated a three-dimensional map showing the Devourer fleet's approach vectors. Traditional military thinking would attempt to meet their advance with maximum force at defensive choke points. Instead, we're going to implement a strategy they can't possibly anticipate. We're going to make them adapt themselves to death. Chen studied the tactical plan with growing amazement. Instead of confronting the Devourer fleet directly, Phantom Regiment intended to seed their advance with technological artifacts designed to trigger specific adaptation responses. Each artifact would present apparent threats that would force the collective intelligence to modify its ships and tactics in predetermined ways. The beauty of collective intelligence, Stone continued, is that every individual shares the same adaptations. Create the right sequence of false threats, and you can guide their evolution in directions that ultimately make them more vulnerable rather than stronger. And if this doesn't work? Chen asked. Stone's expression became absolutely cold. Then we implement Protocol 7 and demonstrate what human warfare looks like when we stop holding back. The first phase of the operation began immediately. Chen watched from the Shadowhawks command center as Phantom Regiment deployed across the Devourer advance route using insertion methods that seemed to defy physics. The operators didn't use traditional spacecraft or conventional transportation. They simply appeared at their target locations through means that Stone classified as compartmentalized technology. Phase 1 deployment complete, reported Colonel Morrison's voice over the communication system. Chun was surprised to learn that Ghost Battalion's commander was participating in Phantom Regiment's operation, but Stone had explained that the mission required the most experienced anti-Devourer specialists available. All artifacts in position, added another voice that Chen didn't recognize. Enemy fleet will encounter first sequence in 18 hours at current velocity. Stone studied the tactical displays with the concentration of a chess master contemplating the endgame. Confirm all monitoring stations are operational. We need complete data on their adaptation responses to calibrate the subsequent phases. Chen watched the countdown timer advance toward the first contact. The artifacts Phantom Regiment had deployed were invisible to conventional sensors, but they would present specific electromagnetic and gravitational signatures designed to simulate various types of weapons or defenses the Devourers might encounter. Contact in 60 seconds, reported the monitoring station. Enemy scouts are approaching the first artifact cluster. The results were immediate and dramatic. The Devourer ships began modifying their hull configurations and energy signatures in response to the perceived threats. Chun watched in fascination as the collective intelligence guided thousands of vessels through synchronized adaptations that made them more resistant to the simulated weapons. Perfect response, Stone observed with satisfaction. They're following the predicted pattern exactly, implementing modifications that will make them vulnerable to the Phase 2 sequence. Over the next 6 hours, the Devourer fleet encountered 17 different artifact clusters, each one designed to trigger specific adaptation responses. The collective intelligence proved its sophistication by successfully countering each apparent threat, but every adaptation moved them further from their optimal configuration. Phase 2 initiating, Morrison reported, deploying active countermeasures. Chen watched the tactical displays with growing excitement as the second phase began. Instead of passive artifacts, Phantom Regiment was now deploying actual weapons and defense systems, but one specifically designed to exploit the adaptations the Devourers had already implemented. The effect was devastating. Devourer ships that had modified their hulls to resist electromagnetic weapons found themselves vulnerable to kinetic projectiles. Vessels that had adapted their shields for energy absorption couldn't defend against biological agents. Ships that had optimized their sensors for gravitational detection became blind to optical attacks. Enemy casualties mounting rapidly, the monitoring station reported. They're attempting counter-adaptations, but each modification creates new vulnerabilities. Stone nodded with cold satisfaction. The limitation of collective intelligence is that it assumes all threats can be adapted to simultaneously. Individual intelligence would recognize the trap and refuse to adapt, but a collective must optimize for all perceived threats. They're caught in an adaptation spiral, Chun realized. Every response to our attacks makes them more vulnerable to the next attack. Exactly. And because their entire fleet shares the same adaptations, every ship becomes equally vulnerable once we understand the pattern. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Devourers possessed overwhelming numerical superiority and technological advantages that should have made victory impossible for their opponents. But Phantom Regiment's psychological warfare tactics turned those advantages into weaknesses. Chun watched as the enemy fleet gradually destroyed itself through its own adaptation responses. Ships collided with each other as modified navigation systems provided conflicting data. Weapons systems overloaded when optimization protocols created unsustainable power demands. Entire formations broke apart as communication adaptations introduced fatal delays in coordination. Phase 3 commencing, Stone announced. All units implement direct engagement protocols. The final phase of the operation revealed the true extent of human military development. Phantom Regiment operators began attacking the Devourer fleet directly using weapons and tactics that existed far beyond current galactic understanding. Personal stealth fields that rendered individuals completely invisible to all known sensors. Weapons that fired projectiles through dimensional shortcuts, bypassing shields and armor entirely. Combat suits that enhanced human reflexes and strength to levels that made individual soldiers capable of boarding and destroying capital ships. Impossible, Chun breathed as she watched the tactical feeds. A single Phantom Regiment operator had infiltrated a Devourer dreadnought and was systematically destroying its critical systems from within while dozens of enemy crew members searched unsuccessfully for the intruder. Not impossible, Stone corrected. Inevitable. Humanity has been preparing for this type of conflict since we first looked at the stars and wondered what we might find there. The battle lasted 14 hours. When it ended, the Devourer fleet had been completely destroyed with 0 human casualties. More importantly, the engagement had been monitored by Council observation posts throughout the region, ensuring that every major galactic civilization had witnessed humanity's true military capabilities. Mission complete, Morrison reported. All objectives achieved. Awaiting extraction orders. Stone nodded with satisfaction. Begin recovery operations. All personnel return to base staging areas. And Colonel? Excellent work. Chun stared at the tactical displays, showing the debris field where the Devourer fleet had been. Tens of thousands of enemy ships reduced to wreckage in a single engagement by 300 human operators using tactics that defied every principle of conventional warfare. General, she said quietly, what happens now? The Council will demand explanations. Every species in the galaxy will want to understand how we achieve this. Stone's smile was predatory. Captain, the age of human inferiority just ended. Tomorrow, the galaxy learns that dismissing humanity was the most expensive mistake any civilization has ever made. Her communication device activated with an incoming transmission from Nexus Prime. Ambassador Zephyrian's image appeared on the screen, his 4 arms moving in patterns that Chun had never seen before. Captain Chun, the alien said, his translator rendering obvious shock and confusion. The Council requests your immediate return for emergency consultation. We have questions about recent developments in the war against the Devourers. Chun looked at Stone, who nodded permission. Of course, Ambassador. I'll return on the next available transport. Though I should mention that I may not be the best person to answer your questions. You might want to speak directly with our military leadership. The transmission ended, and Stone activated the ship's communication system. All stations, this is General Stone. Prepare for transition to Phase 4, diplomatic contact with galactic authorities. It's time to introduce the galaxy to the real human race. Captain Chin's return to Nexus Prime 3 days later was met with an atmosphere unlike anything she had experienced during her tenure as military attaché. The usual bustling activity of the galactic capital had been replaced by an almost palpable tension, with alien delegates huddling in small groups throughout the corridors, speaking in hushed tones about events they couldn't comprehend. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been expanded to include representatives from every member species, creating a crowd that filled the main assembly chamber beyond its normal capacity. Chin took her position in the observation booth, noting the way conversations died as various delegates noticed her arrival. Ambassador Zephyrian stood at the central podium, his four arms moving in agitated patterns as he addressed the assembly. Honored colleagues, we face an unprecedented situation that challenges our fundamental understanding of galactic civilization and military capability. He activated the main holographic display, which showed tactical recordings from the Devourer fleet's final battle. Chun watched impassively as the alien delegates saw, for the first time, what Phantom Regiment had accomplished. These recordings were gathered by our long-range observation posts throughout the combat zone. Zephyrian continued, his translator struggling with the rapid pace of his speech. They show the complete destruction of the largest Devourer fleet ever assembled by forces that remain unidentified. Admiral Vorthak rose from his position among the Aquarian delegation, his gill slits fluttering with obvious confusion. The tactical analysis makes no sense according to accepted principles of warfare. The enemy possessed overwhelming numerical and technological superiority, yet they were defeated by what appears to be a vastly smaller force using unidentifiable weapons and tactics. More disturbing, added High Magistrate Thylon, his crystalline form reflecting the tactical displays, is the complete absence of any known military signatures during the engagement. No energy weapons, no gravitational distortions, no electromagnetic emissions consistent with advanced warfare. It's as if the Devourer fleet was destroyed by ghosts. Chun felt a grim satisfaction as she watched the council delegates struggle to explain what they had witnessed. Their entire understanding of military science was based on the assumption that superior technology guaranteed victory. The idea that inferior forces might achieve strategic dominance through tactics alone was literally incomprehensible to their way of thinking. Ambassador Kethra of the Arachnid Confederacy raised herself on her spider-like legs, mandibles clicking nervously. There's another possibility we must consider. The timing of this engagement, coming so soon after the human delegates return from unexplained absence, suggests connections we may have overlooked. The chamber erupted in chittering, growling, and various other expressions of alien skepticism. Gorvek of the Ursine Commonwealth's massive frame shook with what passed for laughter among his people. The humans, he snorted. Those primitive primates who barely qualify for council membership? Their entire military couldn't defeat a single Devourer scout ship, much less destroy their entire fleet. Perhaps, suggested Ambassador Zephyrian diplomatically, we should ask Captain Chin directly about humanity's possible involvement in recent events. All eyes turned toward Chin's observation booth. She felt the weight of their attention and realized that this was the moment humanity had been building toward for decades. Everything that happened next would reshape the balance of power in the galaxy forever. She activated her communicator and transmitted a coded signal to General Stone, who was maintaining position just outside the system with the Shadowhawk. The response came back immediately. Approved. Full disclosure protocol authorized. Chen rose from her observation station and made her way to the main chamber floor. The assembled delegates watched her approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright dismissal. She could see that most of them still viewed her as a representative of an inconsequential species that had stumbled into galactic politics through pure chance. Honored delegates, Chen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. You have asked about humanity's possible involvement in the recent defeat of the Devourer fleet. I am authorized to provide a complete answer to that question. She paused, looking around the chamber at representatives of civilizations that considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic achievement. Humanity was indeed responsible for the destruction of the Devourer forces. The operation was planned and executed by the United Earth Defense Force using tactics and technologies that we have been developing for over a century. The chamber erupted in confused noise as translators struggled to render various forms of alien disbelief. Ambassador Zephyrian's forearms moved in patterns that Chun had learned indicated extreme agitation among the Valkyrie. Captain Chun, Zephyrian said once order was restored. With respect, that claim is difficult to reconcile with our understanding of human military capabilities. Your species has been assessed as technologically inferior to every other council member. Chun smiled grimly. Your assessment was based on what we chose to reveal about our capabilities. For obvious security reasons, we didn't publicize our more advanced military technologies or our actual strategic doctrines. She activated her personal holographic projector, which displayed technical specifications that made several delegates lean forward with obvious interest. This is the UEDF stealth cruiser Shadowhawk, currently maintaining position approximately 12 light minutes from this station. Its presence has been undetected by your sensor networks, despite being within easy scanning range. Admiral Vorthax's gill slits fluttered rapidly as he studied the display. Impossible. Our detection grids are calibrated to identify any artificial object larger than a personal transport within a full light hour of Nexus Prime. Your detection grids are calibrated to identify threats based on conventional technology, Chin corrected. Humanity's approach to military development followed different principles. While you focused on energy weapons and gravitational manipulation, we perfected stealth, electronic warfare, and what we call asymmetric tactics. She changed the display to show Ghost Battalion's infiltration of the Devourer command vessel during the Proxima Centauri engagement. Several delegates gasped as they realized the implications of what they were seeing. The initial Council victory at Proxima Centauri was achieved through human intervention, Chun continued. Our special operations forces infiltrated and disabled the Devourer command vessel, creating the coordination breakdown that allowed your fleets to achieve tactical success. High Magistrate Thylan's crystalline form shimmered with what Shin recognized as intense concentration. You're claiming the human forces were responsible for our first major victory against the Devourers? I'm stating that human forces were responsible for making that victory possible, Chin replied. Our analysis of Devourer capabilities indicated that conventional military approaches would fail against their adaptive coordination. Alternative tactics were required. She advanced the display to show Phantom Regiment's psychological warfare operation against the main Devourer fleet. The final engagement followed similar principles. Instead of confronting superior numbers and technology directly, we manipulated the enemy's adaptation responses to create vulnerabilities we could exploit. The chamber fell silent as the assembled delegates absorbed the implications of what Sean was revealing. These beings had spent months debating defensive strategies and evacuation protocols while dismissing humanity as irrelevant to their survival. Now, they were learning that their dismissive attitude had blinded them to the very forces that had ultimately saved them. Gorvek was the first to break the silence, his massive form leaning forward with obvious skepticism. Even assuming your claims are accurate, how do you explain the complete absence of human signatures during the final engagement? Our sensors detected no human vessels or energy emissions. Chin's smile became predatory. Because you were looking for the wrong things. Human military doctrine doesn't rely on overwhelming firepower or technological superiority. We win through superior strategy, better intelligence, and tactics that our enemies can't predict or adapt to. She transmitted another coded signal, and the chamber's main displays activated to show real-time feeds from throughout the galaxy. Hundreds of human installations and military units became visible as their stealth systems were deactivated simultaneously. This is the actual scope of human military presence in galactic space, Chen announced as the delegates stared in shock at the evidence of a parallel civilization they had never suspected existed. Every major system, every strategic choke point, every critical resource zone has been under human observation and protection for the past 15 years. Admiral Vorthack's voice was barely a whisper as he studied the displays. How is this possible? Our intelligence services monitor all colonial activities and military deployments. Your intelligence services monitor what we allow them to see, Chen replied. Humanity learned long ago that survival often depends on being underestimated by potential enemies. We've maintained the appearance of technological inferiority while developing capabilities you never imagined possible. Ambassador Zephyrian's forearms had stopped moving entirely, indicating a state of shock that was rare among the normally animated Valkyrie. Captain Chun, you're describing a level of deception that spans decades and involves the systematic misleading of the entire galactic community. I'm describing a survival strategy, Chen corrected firmly. Humanity entered galactic politics as the newest and apparently weakest member of the Council. We had no way of knowing which species might eventually pose threats to human colonies or interests. Maintaining strategic ambiguity was the only logical approach. She paused, looking around the chamber at faces that reflected various stages of shock, anger, and grudging respect. The Devourer crisis forced us to reveal capabilities we would have preferred to keep classified. But the alternative was allowing galactic civilization to collapse while maintaining our cover. High Magistrate Thylan's crystalline form had taken on a different coloration that Chen didn't recognize. What you're describing fundamentally changes the balance of power within the Galactic Council. If humanity possesses military capabilities that exceed our own, then our entire political structure becomes questionable. That depends, Chen replied carefully, on how the Council chooses to respond to this new information. Humanity has no interest in galactic domination or the subjugation of other species. Our primary concerns are the security of human colonies and the maintenance of peaceful interspecies relations. But you do expect formal recognition of your actual capabilities and strategic importance, Ambassador Kethra observed, her mandibles clicking with what Chun had learned indicated careful thought among the arachnids. We expect to be treated as equals rather than primitives, Chen confirmed. The dismissive attitude this council has shown toward humanity ends today. We've proven that technological superiority doesn't guarantee strategic dominance, and we've demonstrated that underestimating human capabilities has potentially fatal consequences. Gorvek's massive form shifted as he processed the implications of Chen's words. And if the Council refuses to acknowledge human military equality, Chen's expression became absolutely cold. Then, the Council will discover that the Devourer crisis was only the first demonstration of what human military doctrine can achieve. We have no desire for conflict with other Council species, but we will not tolerate being dismissed or marginalized. The chamber erupted in agitated discussion as delegates from various species debated among themselves in their native languages. Chun watched the chaos with satisfaction, knowing that every word was being transmitted back to the home governments of 12 different galactic civilizations. Ambassador Zephyrian finally restored order by activating the chamber's attention signals. Captain Chun, this council requires time to analyze the information you provided and consult with our respective governments. However, I believe I speak for all delegates when I say that humanity's contributions to our survival will not be forgotten. I hope that's true, Chen replied, because the galaxy is about to enter a new era of interspecies relations, and humanity intends to play a central role in shaping that future. As the session adjourned and delegates began filing out in small groups, Chen noticed that their conversations had taken on an entirely different character. The casual dismissiveness was gone, replaced by the careful consideration that species gave to potential equals or threats. Her communication device activated with an incoming transmission from General Stone. Captain, I trust the presentation went well. Beyond our expectations, General. I believe the point has been made quite clearly. Excellent. Stand by for Phase 5 implementation. We've received authorization from Earth to begin full diplomatic integration protocols. Humanity's isolation period is officially over. Chun smiled as she watched the last of the alien delegates leave the chamber. For 5 years, she had endured their condescending attitudes and dismissive comments about human capabilities. Today, that era had ended forever. Tomorrow, the galaxy would begin learning what it meant to share space with a species that had turned warfare into an art form through necessity and had disguised that mastery through patience and strategic thinking. The age of human equality had begun, and it had been purchased with the blood of enemies who had made the fatal mistake of underestimating their opponents. Chun gathered her materials and prepared to return to her quarters. There would be much work ahead as humanity transitioned from secret protectors to acknowledged partners in galactic civilization. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. After all, it wasn't every day that a species got to watch 12 different civilizations simultaneously realize they had been completely wrong about everything they thought they knew about military power in the galaxy. The dismissive age was over. The human age had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the days that followed, as news of humanity's revelation spread throughout galactic space, one fact became clear to every intelligent species. When veteran soldiers decided to hit back, the entire balance of cosmic power could change overnight. The universe had just learned that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones that looked like prey until the moment they chose to reveal their true nature. And humanity had been very patient hunters indeed.